Maundy Thursday is my favorite service of the church year. I know that may come as a surprise. You might think that I would or should say that Easter or Christmas are my favorite times, and I love those days, but there's just something about this night, the intensity of it, the intimacy of it, the involvement of the people who show up for it, that makes it a liturgy like no other. And I've attended quite a few Maundy Thursday services in my life, and while there are these common practices that we share, I'm always amazed at the peculiarities and the local customs of this night that make each service uniquely wondrous. And though the night is not yet here, I can already feel the grief that's kind of growing inside of me. I'm already missing the Maundy Thursdays I've known. I'm already missing Maundy Thursday even before I get there. And I will miss much, and I will especially miss what we call the stripping of the altar. That annual ritual of stripping away all the appointments and hangings, and in some places even the furniture, from that area we call the sanctuary, that holy ground around and on the altar. In some places I've been, it is a ritual that is reserved as a kind of annual honor for the altar guild. And in other places it's done by the priest alone. And then again, there are churches where everyone gets involved. The acolytes, ushers, chalice bearers, which presents its own challenges. No matter how this ritual is accomplished, in some ways we never get it quite right. It's never done perfectly, and that's part of the beauty of it. I mean, I've seen acolytes drop stacks of hymnals. I know a priest who forgot that his microphone was still on. And a very long time ago, much to the shock of my parents as a young acolyte, I actually dropped the American flag to the ground. In and through all of this, midst of all that we don't get quite right or perfect, every time I've sensed and witnessed the sights and sounds of grace, people doing the best they can, and the best they can, that's what pleases God. And then there's Jane. In a church I once served, it was our custom that after everything was stripped away, the lights were dimmed down to this one spotlight on the altar. And the white fair linen was folded by our deacon. And then it was presented to Jane. And she would bow to the cross, and then she would turn very slowly and process the cloth out of the nave. And she moved so carefully and slowly, and she never looked down at the chancel steps. And Jane would process that cloth right down the middle aisle of the church in a way as it made you kind of feel like she was carrying the very body of Jesus. I'm going to miss all of this. What will you miss in these next 3 days? Maybe you're going to miss singing a certain hymn that you always sing, or maybe it's the flowering of the cross. It's okay if you're going to miss the Easter egg hunt. I'm going to miss that too. I know a bunch of people who are going to miss what we call the chocolate feast after the Easter vigil. Some of you are going to miss spending the night in vigil in prayer after Maundy Thursday. Some of you are going to miss washing of feet. Others will miss this telling of the Passion narrative or the Stations of the Cross, and still others will miss the mysterious chants of the Easter vigil or the ringing of bells. What will you miss this year? You see, it's important to lean into that absence and to name what we ache for, because this is called grief, and it's a part of this reality that we're living in right now. And grief is real, and it's very normal. But now let's go a little bit deeper into the magic of these 3 days. For while so much is being stripped away and so much is missing, maybe it's in that emptiness that we may come to find that there is one thing that cannot or will not ever be stripped away. Let's lean into that too. You see, card-carrying Episcopalians and church nerds know that the definition of a sacrament is something like this: an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace. This year, so much of what we know as the outward and visible signs and symbols are stripped away or radically simplified. However, what is not stripped away is the inward and spiritual grace that rests not in us, not in anything or anything about us, but the grace that rests in the heart of God. And it is this grace that is the bedrock of the gifts that are given to us on Maundy Thursday. Remember, it's the night before Jesus dies. He's about to be stripped away from his friends, so to speak. So he sits them down and tells them what is most important. And at least according to John, Jesus goes on for some 4 chapters. But at the heart of it, Jesus tells them, love one another. Love is the way, the truth, and the life. And love is stronger than anything else. It cannot be stripped away. Love is forever. And seeming to know that they also needed more than words, Jesus got down on the floor with them, and he gave them 2 gifts, the meal and the washing of feet. And we could say much about them, but what I want to say is this, that these gifts are a foretaste of heaven. And that foretaste of heaven is grace. A foretaste of heaven. It's a curious proposition, especially when it comes to the meal. Pardon a little snarkiness here, but if this little bit of bread and this sip of port wine is a foretaste of heaven, then we might ask for an upgrade. But remember the definition, inward grace. That is where the foretaste of heaven lies. It's not so much in the food as it is in the company we keep. I mean, remember that night? As far as I can tell from my reading of the Bible, Jesus feeds everyone, including Judas, who will betray him, Peter, who will deny him, and the rest of the gang who will run away and lock themselves up in a room until it's all over. And knowing all of that, Jesus feeds them, and he feeds us. To you all hearts are open, all desires known, and from you no secrets are hid. That's what we pray at the beginning of every communion, every Eucharist. Jesus knows us. And knowing what Jesus knows, he still feeds us. And he feeds us with grace. He feeds everyone and anyone who stretches out their hands and opens their hearts to the gift of grace. That is the foretaste of heaven. Grace, mercy, love to everyone and all who reach for God. And even when the bread and the wine is stripped away, we are fed by grace. And then to underscore this point, Jesus gets down on the floor. I mean, really down on the floor. And Jesus washes their feet. Again, he gives this gift to everyone in the room as far as I could tell. Imagine the kind of love that can do that. In my imagination, I've come to believe that this too is a foretaste of heaven. What I mean is that a lot of images about heaven paint a picture of pearly golden gates and a big record book packed of all your rights and your wrongs. But what if it's not like that at all? What if when you awake, you find yourself not standing at the pearly gates, but you're sitting in a simple wooden chair? And kneeling on the floor before you is Jesus, who reaches out and lifts your feet into his hands and begins to wash them. And then Jesus looks up to you and says, "Well done. Well done, good and faithful servant. Welcome home." Why is this my favorite service of the year? Because here on this night we are given the gift of heaven before we ever get there. The very gift of grace. So welcome to the 3 days. I encourage you to try to keep some semblance of these services in addition to what your own churches are doing. There are liturgies for your use on our diocesan website. Wash your own feet. Share a meal on the floor. Read the words. Say the prayers. And as you do, lean into all that will be missed and grieve. And remember that all that is stripped away, but also remember what is eternal and absolute. Remember the inward and spiritual gift of grace that cannot be stripped away and holds us and carries us this night, every night, and forever.